wanted to say one more thing about the skin scales, the Actinopterygii. One interesting example of how it's being used. So fish scales apparently can be used, at least some of the are given rise to treatments for burn. It's a terrible way to sort of learn how important your skin layer is when it gets burned. So this has been, there's been promise, seems to be pretty legit, that the fish scales skin from a tilapia, which is a really common fish, can be used to treat burn victims. Your skin will grow back, but in the meantime, you got to keep infections from happening. You got to keep out the bad stuff, keep in the good stuff. And your skin is perfectly adapted to doing that. If you don't have that, then so reproduction. So what does reproduction look like in the Actinopterygii? So this contrasts this with the chondrichthyes, the sharks. Remember sharks, there's a strong component of maternal care. Males, by the way, have nothing to do after mating. But the female, she invests of herself, her energy, her resources, her flesh into the production of, into each young. It doesn't produce hundreds or thousands of eggs, or in some cases, some fish, tens of thousands of eggs. With the Actinopterygii, we see, for one thing, it's mostly external fertilization, not much internal fertilization. You can see why internal fertilization would evolve, by the way, if you're in the water. You know, the eggs go out, and the sperm goes on there. Don't the sperm just get caught in the currents and get washed out? Yeah, that's the problem with, actually, it's hard for the sperm and the egg to get together in water. Anyway, it's mostly external fertilization. Keep in mind, internal fertilization has to involve the evolution of structures like claspers. But they don't have them for the most part. And they invest more in more eggs, each one of which has very little yolk. So you can either have a lot of eggs with a lot of yolk or well provisioned, or you can have lots of eggs, each one of which has very little chance of surviving because it's just one of many. It has very tiny, little tiny bit of energy, and so there's a good chance that along the way in its development, it will sort of fall behind or not be able to get the resources it needs. One example of this is with salmon spawning. They're in a river, so there's the female there. The eggs, fortunately, sort of go down to the bottom, but the male is going to come along and have to fertilize these eggs for this to be successful. And the sperm are, they're going to be floating in the water column, including floating away. So the sperm, of course, have tails that can swim, but of course you can imagine many of them never make it to actually to the egg. So it's an awkward thing trying to mate in water. When the eggs do develop, they look like this. So that's what you see here. There's a bunch of eggs, dozens, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands in some cases. What generally happens is each one of these little fry, look at the eyes developing there. Each one of them is like an acorn in a forest. Very little chance of actually becoming an adult because something along the way is going to eat them. They're just not going to develop properly. They themselves, the little swimming things, are not going to get enough food. But when there are thousands of them, there's a good chance that dozens of them will survive to become adults. There is a tremendous amount of variation across families, and one of the great examples of this variation is with the mouth-brooding cichlids. Cichlids. If you're into tropical fish aquarium, you probably know about cichlids. They're some of the really popular fish. Here's an example here of, well, this actually shows mouth brooding. So the problem with having all your young, like we just saw here, out like this, is they're nutritious snacks for whatever comes along. So better to have them inside a structure you can control, like your mouth. If you might wonder, how does this fish ever get to eat? when its mouth is full of eggs. And the truth is, when its mouth is full of eggs, oftentimes this is the male, he doesn't get to eat. You think about how this might have evolved. Mind blowing. Here's an example of a mouth brooder that has a cuckoo in it. This shows the cuckoo. I'll tell you what I mean by that. A different species which inserts itself in there and gets protection, even though it's not the same species. It's a parasite. You'll see it. But notice here, you have predatory fish coming in that will eat these little fish, the babies. And so we should see here in a moment, you'll see all the young, when the dad opens his mouth, I think it's usually dad, the fish will swim back in. So obviously fertilization happens externally first. There they went. And then later on, the young develop and they somehow know how to go into dad's mouth. Usually what happens is the mom leaves and dad is the one that does all the parental care at this point, which is mouth brooding. So there they are, vulnerable out in the environment. And then they run back in again. You can think about maybe this evolved from, I suspect this evolved from, males accidentally eating their own. There's other species, a species of catfish called the cuckoo catfish, which lays its eggs in an environment so that its young hatch among all the young of the host, and then they all end up in the mouth of the host later on. It also it will eat the eggs of the host as well, so that it's sometimes the only one left in there. I think we show that here. There's a little baby. In this case here, it's raising a parasite. What happened to its own young? They're gone. So it's kind of like a cowbird or cuckoo, which kicks the host eggs out and becomes the only one. So here it is, but this is not the biological parent. This is a parasite. It's taking advantage of this response to admit the young into the mouth. Crazy. That's a really great illustration of just the diversity of reproduction in the bony fishes. What else about them? They are really well known for their jaw structure. I mentioned they have highly mobile upper and lower jaws. Many of them do, some, not all of them, but especially the teleost. And so if you look at the teleost here, these diagrams, what you're seeing here is an extremely mobile mouth. The bones, the separate bones that make up the mouth can move independently of each other and form a large chamber. You have a small fish, but you can form a large chamber temporarily to bring in something large and suck in a lot of water. The fish can suck in prey. They use this by changing the volume of their buccal cavity. Same way if you take a little plastic pipette and squeeze it and put it down in the water and unsqueeze it, you increase the buccal cavity and in goes the fluid. You want to suck up Daphnia, you want to go take a plastic pipette and get Daphnia out of the water. Some examples. This video here really shows just a classic teleost, highly derived jaw, highly mobile jaw function. What you're seeing there is not skin. There's skin there. What you're actually seeing there is bone. So the maxilla and the premaxilla extended out. So imagine that. We have our mouth. Our mouth does not do that. Of course, our jaw opens and closes, but it doesn't go out. Your dog's jaw doesn't go out. It just has the extension that it already has. If it wants to grab something, it has to move its whole head up. They do that as well. They also have this little, and you also see here, another thing here is it's how they can sneak up on prey. In this case here, there was a captive. Another example of the high diversity. Here is in some sort of like moray eels, and actually quite a few different species. There are adaptations of the pharyngeal arch such that a separate jaw, inner jaw, is formed with teeth. So the prey gets taken in by the first set of jaws and then held and punctured by a second set of jaws. If you look up videos of this, it's hard to find any sort of live or sort of action videos that really show it really well. They're all kind of diagrams. We all know this is a really, if you're really into fishing, like bass fishing, this is something that you really love, because the great thing about, like bass and bluefish is they just go after their prey very aggressively, and they'll grab. So they're really likely to grab lures. Not all fish species are likely to grab a lure. So they're adapted to just, so nothing, you're out there fishing, nothing's happening, all of a sudden something grabs your hook, takes off with it, and that's what they do. And keep in mind, they take off with it because there's other predators around that could steal that prey from them. But they're able to give themselves a little bit of an advantage and also open their mouth wider and create a suction force by having mobile jaws. So at some point, you have the evolution of highly mobile jaws. We're going to see that also with the case of snakes, who've done this even to, I think, an even greater extent. It's all about using existing bones that are ancestral and existing connections between bones. Are they ossified? Or are they flexible? So the premaxilla and maxilla are mobile. We can't imagine that because our premaxilla here, upper incisors, they're sort of welded almost, where they're grown into the bone on either side. So we have the premaxilla and the maxilla are effectively all the upper jaw. But actually, they're separate bone there, and they are connected. Imagine those being connected by ligaments, such that you could have muscle attachments that could allow them to extend out and snap back. Look at ours again. We have our upper jaw is basically the maxilla, which helps form our zygomatic arch in mammals, and the orbit. And then there's our premaxilla, which you don't think much about, so holds our incisors. Except that, of course, that is sort of what the face of your face is. Your front incisors are kind of the part of, or one of the most highly visible parts of your face. So you have rapid, forceful suction, and also the jaws going out to grab. Because keep in mind, they are oftentimes after other fish or other slippery prey. So you're going to need to get those teeth into the prey and hold on to them and draw them in. At the same time, when you open your buccal cavity, you still need to breathe. See, they're having to eat and breathe at the same time. And breathing means a constant flow of water through over the gills in the operculum, the opercular cavity. But that opercular cavity is an opening back out again. So it's a very complicated coordination between the operculum and the mouth. And of course, not that they think about any of this, but notice here this diagram shows you have the different bones and they're connected with connective tissue and muscle. And you have a premaxilla sliding forward. And again, we'll see this with snakes as well. It gives the snakes, you've seen the video of a snake eating an egg. It just doesn't seem even possible. It doesn't seem possible because our bones are immobile. So what does this look like? Again, we have the maxilla up here, the mandible. Sometimes the dentary bone is just called the mandible. And you have the protrusible premaxilla here. If you look at a section through that here are the gills, here's the buccal cavity here, and they're going to be able to change the volume of this buccal cavity in such a way that you draw in fluid, you have suction, and then you trap the prey. You trap the prey, that is when, for example, if they have a tongue, this is when the tongue comes into works. The tongue manipulates prey, the teeth puncture and hold prey. And you want to get it going down the right pipe and not out the operculum. And then it needs to go back to its normal shape, because that's the other thing the fish has to do. It has to be able to swim through the water in an aerodynamic way. So when it's not eating, that's sort of the perfect shape for the fish for swimming. Pharyngeal jaws, these actually also evolved from gill arches. So here we see another example of former gill arches evolving into jaws. Although again, we don't actually know that the mandible evolved from a gill arch. It evolved from one of the arches, but actually something else may have evolved into an arch that wasn't a gill arch. It's very complicated, and it's so complicated I didn't include it really in this class because I need to read about it more. But this is the pharyngeal jaw is another arch adaptation. So really, for the evolution of vertebrates, much of this is really about the evolution of the jaw function, and how you eat and what you eat. Next video, we will look at locomotion in fishes, which is actually in depth is very complex, but we're going to look at it more superficially, but it'll be enough to get you'll understand most of how fish move. That'll be in the next video.